If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy.
Download and subscribe
at BeBullish.com.
The Red Apple Media Podcast Network presents This is Protecting America. Now, here's Emmy-winning journalist Rita Cosby.
Welcome to another edition of Protecting America. I'm Rita Cosby. So who is the new socialist mayor-elect of New York City, Zohran Mamdani? And what do we know about his radical associates? Some with very dangerous and controversial ties. Well, joining us now to discuss this and so much more is Peter Schweizer. He is the great investigative journalist, best-selling author, and also president of the Government Accountability Institute. Peter, it's really great to have you here, especially on such an important topic.
Well, thank you, Rita. Always good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
What concerns you the most about Zohran Mamdani?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is obviously his views on subjects, and those views, I think, reflect what is often called the Red-Green Alliance. This is a sort of strange melding of political forces, really, when you think of it. The red part of the coalition are progressives, left-wing members of the Democratic Socialists of America, very much on the left wing of the political spectrum, like AOC, and even further to the left. And the second part of that coalition is the Green Coalition, which is representative of Muslim or Islamist political activists inside the United States. And it's odd because obviously there are certain issues where these two factions would totally disagree. Things like LGBTQ issues, for example, would be one of them. The rights of women, feminism, abortion would be another one. But they've sort of forged this coalition to work together to achieve political success. Mamdani being the most recent example. The other ones, of course, would be AOC, Ilhan Omar, for example. And this is, I think, a overlooked but very concerning political movement that really started to come into fore in the early 2000s. In 2007, the two children of Che Guevara, the famous revolutionary, a butcher of Cuba, as he's been called, his children traveled to Tehran to meet with the mullahs. To see if there was a chance to work together. The meetings didn't start off well because, of course, they wanted the daughter Che Guevara to sort of wear head covering, which she refused. The imams mentioned that Che Guevara had found God, which, of course, the children rejected. But after the initial fighting and tumult, they agreed that they were united by one thing, and that was attacking and defeating the United States. And that was sort of the beginning of this coalition. And you see with Mamdani those views coming to fore, the progressive views, but also the Islamist views about how New York City should be run and governed. And I think there's a lot to be concerned. That's of concern, as are, I think, some of the international ties that exist between Mamdani and radical foreign groups. Which of the foreign ties really trouble you the most? Well, there's obviously the ties with Hamas and the political elements of Hamas. He has praised the organization. He had a career before politics as a rapper when he famously did rap songs talking about the Holy Land the Holy Land 7. These were the individuals that were arrested in the United States for raising money for Hamas. And you see this in the international media coverage. People really haven't been paying attention to this. Hezbollah, another terrorist organization, has a newspaper in Lebanon. Before the election, they were talking about the opportunity that Mamdani presents for Muslims to advance politically in the country. And they posited that this might be only the beginning for Mamdani, that he could be mayor of New York and then he could end up serving in a presidential cabinet. And they mentioned one of the positions they hope he might obtain would be the secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. Now, why a terrorist movement would want somebody that would to be the head of the Homeland Security Department, of course, is an obvious question. But you also look at the Iranian media. They have also been praiseworthy. And after Mamdani was elected, they noted that the influences on him theologically come from the Shiite part of the Islamic faith, which, of course, the Iranian regime is. They know the specific people that have inspired him in terms of their teaching. And they as well believe that this represents kind of a foothold for Islamist causes in the United States. So, the question becomes, what is Mamdani going to do as mayor? There's all the discussions about, he wants the government-run grocery stores, but there are a lot of things you can do as mayor on the national security level, a surprising number of things that should be concerning. So, for example, New York City is already a sanctuary city, meaning that local authorities don't cooperate with ICE and its law enforcement. But there are all sorts of resources that can be brought to bear to help illegal immigrants in New York City who have a Muslim background to protect them and shelter them and provide them necessities. And there would not be a lot that the federal government would be able to do, particularly if city property were involved. And what Mamdani has said repeatedly, he said in his victory speech, he said it before, is that Muslim immigrants were the backbone of his campaign, that they were the core to getting him the nomination in the first place, and they were a crucial ingredient in helping get him elected. So that's one area that we should be watching and be very concerned about what might lie ahead in the future.
And, Peter, one of the things you talked about, some of the groups where the money could go, and you're right, the mayor has a lot of say into where some of the nonprofit allocations. And I was just reading recently, Linda Sarsour, who has a very interesting concerning past and concerning past comments. She was his mentor, and her nonprofit raked in $4 million from New York City taxpayers. That's pretty incredible. And that's even before he takes office. So can you imagine maybe what's going to happen when he takes office?
Yeah, that's right. And Linda Sarsour is a classic example of this red-green coalition, because on the one hand, she has praised Sharia law and says, Sharia law is wonderful. For example, the credit card companies won't be able to charge interest because that's part of Sharia law. So there are all these really great things about Sharia law. So she's done that, and at the same time, she has advocated for LGBTQ rights. And of course, the question is, how do you reconcile those two? There will be a reckoning at some point. And some of the Islamist activists have talked about the fact that, look, this is a temporary coalition. We don't agree with these people on some issues. We believe some of the things that they are doing are despicable, and we will at some point rein them in. But for now, we need them. So this coalition exists as a coalition of convenience, and people like Linda Sarsour are, I think, frankly, being dishonest when they talk about that these two movements can meld together, because there's so many elements that are not reconcilable, and yet that, I think, is sort of far off. I think that day of reckoning is far off. What we're going to see is a continued effort to consolidate power. You're going to see the more Islamic elements get certain positions in the mayor's office, and then you're going to see progressives get certain positions in this office. He's going to work to appease both of them, and I think, unfortunately, that's going to leave New Yorkers with the worst of both worlds.
If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy.
Download and subscribe
at BeBullish.com.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's going to be so extreme. You talked about gay rights, and I keep thinking about also, Peter, the fact that Mamdani, he's from Uganda. And there was that big controversy that happened during the campaign when he showed up with this woman and he said, I don't really know her. And then it turns out he's a friend of, the woman was a good friend, apparently, according to reporting, of his family. And she was the one who was pushing for probably one of the most anti-gay bills in Uganda and throughout the world. Meanwhile, he's saying, he's the protector of gay rights.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the Imam Wahaj that he met with, on the eve of the election. He's the cleric in Brooklyn, I believe it is, who was the unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center. He's got 3 adult children that are in jail and convicted on terrorism charges. He has been extremely outspoken about what he regards as the social decay as demonstrated by, gay rights and gay activists, and even the act of gays romantically involved, to him is absolutely abhorrent. And yet he is a significant spiritual influence to Mamdani. So, look, at some point things are going to come to head, and he's going to have to pick which side of the equation this is on. If you look at his history, you look at his upbringing, you look at his roots, you look at where he worships and what he worships, those in the progressive movement that are concerned about civil liberties and civil rights ought to be, I would argue, particularly concerned when he decides to make that shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, as we know, in Uganda, one of the things that they push for, and this is his home country, of course, this is his family's roots. It's where he had, his wedding celebration. They said that gay sexual relations are life sentences and repeat offenses are death penalty. I mean, that's shocking.
Yeah, it is. And let's also remember that this is a family, Mamdani's family, that is very close to the Qatari royal family. The Qatari royal family has really bankrolled Mamdani's mother's political career. One of the daughters that is one of the prominent members of the Qatari royal family has been very vocal in supporting his campaign on social media. The situation with regard to those issues in Qatar is not particularly good. So there's this strange dichotomy. On the one hand, Mamdani has tried to present himself as sort of this child of the developing world. This whole sort of strange thing, you remember, Rita, where he insisted on eating rice with his fingers.
Right.
As if to sort of demonstrate his bona fides. But look, when you look at that developing world, where he comes from and which he associates with, whether it's Qatar, whether it is Uganda, these are not places where the civil liberties of people that have different lifestyles, different belief systems, are particularly welcome. And the Islamic strain in Uganda, there is tension between Christians and Islamic members, and the Mamdani compound is not that far from a prominent mosque in Uganda. The Muslims in Uganda are particularly hardcore. So it's going to be interesting to see how he squares these things. Look, if we know anything from the campaign, Rita, we know that he is smooth. We know that the media is not going to particularly challenge him. We know that he's not going to put himself in a position to answer difficult questions. It's really, I think, going to come down to when he sort of divides the spoils, who's going to be running which departments between these factions, the sort of Muslim faction, the progressive faction. Is there going to be a food fight that breaks out between those two sides because they're unhappy with what they're going to get? That's when you might see a split in the coalition. But I think absent that, if both sides are generally getting what they want, you've got a governing coalition in his mind that's going to be very effective and very formidable. And what we've seen with progressives in other areas when they get elected, whether it's as a mayor or in a congressional district or congressional office, their governing strategy is wrapped around the notion of perpetuating their rule. And that means solidifying your political allies and punishing your enemies. All politicians, to a certain extent, do that. But this coalition in particular uses the gears of government for the extension of their political power. And this is what you see in some of the statements from the Iranian media and others, that does this augur in now a permanence that we are going to see this governing coalition rule New York going forward, that the days of moderate Democrats or moderate Republicans being able to mount a campaign for New York mayor is gone because this coalition works together and isn't effective. And we'll have to see.
Yeah, that's a really powerful question, Peter, and you're right. And if you look at who was voting for him, predominantly people who've been in this country less than 5 years. So it's sort of this new coalition clearly tapping into that group, too.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I think progressives have really shifted. I mean, you look at Bernie Sanders and others, they have shifted from being generally, wanting to protect the wages of the working class. So they've generally been restrictive on immigration. But they realized about 15 to 20 years ago, wait a minute, if we bring in people from other societies and cultures that are more collectivist, that are more oriented towards government, that don't have the sort of independent American spirit yet because they haven't been here long enough, that is a voting block for us. And I think what you're going to see with Mamdani is wanting to encourage people that are that minded from around the country and around the world to come to New York to mint new voters for himself and for his coalition. This is what happens in New York. It's obviously a global city, but politically it's global as well. And there's a lot of people around the world looking for this as an opportunity to advance their interests in our country.
Yeah, you're right. And some of them good, many of them not, I mean, that is the problem, too, and questionable now feeling like maybe they have a friend, in a higher place. The other thing you didn't mention also, Peter, you mentioned his mom. What about his father, Mamdani's father, who essentially said that suicide bombers are misunderstood?
Yes, and has really made excuses for Muslim misconduct in Darfur. You remember Darfur in Sudan, which was a big issue 20 years ago, where the estimates from the UN and others is that 400,000 Christians were slaughtered by Islamist tribes from the north. Well, Mamdani just literally wrote a book on that didn't come out, maybe a month ago. And in that book, he basically makes excuses and said, no, this was not genocide. This was just sort of a typical civil war. It happens. And so this is a habit. And we understand Zohran Mamdani is not his father. But on the other hand, he has never distanced himself at all from any of his father's radical views, whether it's the view, as you correctly pointed out, that suicide bombing is a legitimate form of resistance to occupation. Blowing up civilians with other civilians is acceptable. Making excuses for genocidal situations like happened in South Sudan, or arguing that 9/11 was essentially justified, that it was angst and frustration and anger by people over the issue in the Middle East and Israel. So hey, we're sorry, but this kind of happens. We're gonna knock down this iconic building and kill thousands of New Yorkers. That's essentially the posture that his father took. And again, no one's saying you should attack your father, but you could simply say, look, I'm not my father. I don't share his views. I reject those views. He's never done that. He's never said that. And it was something that you would expect him to do in the middle of a campaign, which he didn't do. So I really doubt now that he's once in office that he's going to do that, because I think it reflects his view of America being this colonial society, and this is an opportunity for those who have been victimized by a colonial society have an opportunity to fight back effectively.
Yeah, no, I agree. He never did. And in fact, it seems like he very much praises his father. And you're right, shares his beliefs. The other thing, too, as you're talking, Peter Schweizer, that I think about, Mamdani's going to be mayor of New York City on the 25th anniversary of 9/11. That, to me, I think a lot of people have a pit in their stomach thinking about that.
Yeah, and here's the other thing that's interesting. What happened at the 9/11 anniversary this year? Mamdani made some statements. What Mamdani also did was he went on Qatari TV in Qatar a couple of days after. And, I don't know of any other American candidate for a mayoral position in the United States that goes on Qatari TV during the middle of a campaign, but he did. And it was very, very interesting if you looked at it through the language of, he knew he was being watched by people in the United States, so he wasn't going to say anything too radical, but he was making a statement and making a point by going on that TV station and talking about Middle East politics and talking about American foreign policy. He was making a statement about what his interests are and where his loyalties lie. And I don't say that in the context of questioning, his citizenship or anything like that. I say it simply in the context of what is his view about what his responsibilities are and what he cares about. If you love your country, you want good for your country, and you don't spend your time criticizing your country. If you love your spouse, you don't spend all your time criticizing your spouse. That's really what Mamdani has done. He's been highly critical of the United States on so many levels, and you have to wonder going forward as he's making decisions regarding policies for New York, but also is talking to other mayors and is traveling overseas. Look, if you're mayor of New York, you in effect have kind of a foreign policy, and Mamdani's going to have that, and I think we know where that's all going and what it's all going to mean.
Yeah, and boy, I think a lot of it's very troubling, especially some of the anti-Israel comments that he has made, seems to continue to do. And you look at the DSA platform, there are so many questions here. Peter, this was such a powerful podcast. You got to come back on again soon. And everybody, be sure to subscribe and share to this podcast. And Peter Schweizer, really just great information. You're one of the great investigative journalists and just great big best-selling authors out there. You've done such good work. And please keep us posted because he hasn't even taken office yet. So I think we're going to have a lot to talk about the next few years.
We will. Rita, it's always fun to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
And everybody, I'll be back soon with another great edition of Protecting America. And of course, you can catch me every weeknight, 10 p.m. to midnight on the legendary WABC Radio. This is Rita Cosby, and thanks for all you do to protect America.
If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy.
Download and subscribe
at BeBullish.com.